Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the Bundesliga podcast. I'm Manu and Stefan Bienkowski. It is Thursday. It's the preview show. We're almost done with this week. It's a big match week coming up as well. But Stefan, before we dive into all of that, this is, of course, the biggest day since 1972 at least, because it's Canada versus the USA in hockey. It's a Four Nations Cup final. There's no bigger game, even the Substack chat agrees, than this match tonight. How are you doing, and are you going to stay up to watch it?
I almost quit the Substack when I saw you set up a thread for this stupid competition. I had no idea what you're talking about. I thought you'd made a mistake and you meant the Six Nations rugby tournament.
And no one cares about that.
Yeah. So how does this work? Four nations. Who are the four nations?
Canada, US, Sweden, and Finland.
Right. Okay.
It would have been six. Traditionally, it would have been six with Russia and the Czech Republic, but maybe in the next iteration, because Putin is now the president of the United States, maybe then they're back in.
Four Nations is almost as bad as the rugby tournament, the Six Nations. I've got a few friends who are huge rugby fans, and here in Scotland there's a lot of debate because Scotland were quite good at rugby for about 2 or 3 years, like 5 or 6 years ago. And they used to always say, oh, well, why can't the football team be as good as the rugby team? And I would say, well, that's because there's only like 10 nations that play rugby. So, give me a shout when it becomes a real international sport, and then we can talk about it. When you start having like the former Soviet states playing rugby, that's when you have a proper tournament, like you do in football. And I always have this kind of thing saying that like you can actually track Scotland's fall down the world rankings over the course of like the 70s, 80s and 90s. And it tracks in parallel with the fall of the Berlin Wall because more and more nations break apart. And each of those individual nations are better than Scotland at football. But yeah, anyway, I've gone way off track. Enjoy your hockey tournament. Try not to start a North American war over it.
Trump Truth Socialed about it today. That's how big it is.
Wow.
Apparently, the winner gets to annex the loser. So if Canada wins today, the US is going to become the 11th province.
Well, I was just about to say. If Trump gets his way, will be the three country tournament.
Yeah, it's a wild time. No, and this is, of course, it's a test balloon. Apparently, we're getting a proper World Cup of hockey back in 2 years too, and then there's going to be 8 nations in it, including Germany, the Czech Republic, and all these other countries, and probably Russia, considering the way things are going. But as you said, it has absolutely nothing to do with the Bundesliga. It is a huge game here in North America. I think a lot of people are going to tune in. And I do think that it's going to be a big discussion point, but it's not going to be as big of a discussion point as anything that we want to chat about. We have 3 games that we picked out to preview this week, and that's Mainz against St Pauli, Gladbach against Augsburg, and then, of course, the big one, Bayern against Frankfurt. I think a lot of people are really looking forward to this game on Sunday, first against third. I personally think this is going to be a fascinating matchup, and we're going to discuss it at the very end of the show. Let's start with Mainz against St Pauli. Kicker did a big story this week, and they named the 4 surprise teams of the this season: Freiburg, Mainz, Gladbach, who we're also going to talk about, and Wolfsburg. And I need to mention too, we are going to talk about Wolfsburg as part of the DFB Pokal coverage this week. Right, we're going to do both the DFB Pokal matches as bonus shows for the Substack followers midweek. So we're going to park some time for Wolfsburg then too, if you're interested. But yeah, Mainz, they're playing a St Pauli side. A little bit of a tough luck. James Sands, who they signed from New York City FC in the winter, and I thought has been really, really good for them in midfield with a really complicated ankle injury. He's going to be out for quite some time. He had a surgery already. He's going to be missing. And on top of that, and this is more bad news for Mainz, they're playing a Mainz side, more bad news for St Pauli, not Mainz. They're playing a Mainz side who, with a win, could technically jump into the top 4. Now, mind you, that is true for 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th place as well in the Bundesliga. But still, I mean, this Mainz team has been spectacular this season. Bo Henriksen, who I personally think is one of the best coaches in German football at the moment, has really put together a really strong team. They're a lot of fun to watch. They're not always the most consistent, but Wu is. And, I think there is a good chance that we're going to see this Mainz team end up in European football at the end of the year.
Yeah, they absolutely have been one of the most surprise packages of the Bundesliga. And you're right, they're actually quite a hard team to nail down. The kind of perceived wisdom with Mainz for a number of years now is that depending on who the head coach is, they're either very good at home, they're very good away from home. It kind of varies from one season to the next, it would seem. And I think there was some suggestion this season that this would be a similar one. But I think what they've done really well this year is they're just perfectly solid in both categories. At home, they've picked up 18 points from 11 games, and away from home, they picked up 17 points from 11 games. And we just kind of look at their performances. Obviously, the win over Heidenheim last weekend is a perfect example of that, where they're just kind of quite happy to just kind of, pick up the points that really matter. And obviously having Burkhardt come back, I think he got a goal and an assist, if I'm not mistaken, in that game. And yeah, I've just been super impressed with them. I actually was looking up their stats today, and trying to compare like the team's overall stats and see like what areas of the pitch they're actually improving in. And they've quite literally improved in every metric. Their pressing per game has gone up, their goals per game has gone up, their possession per game has gone up, their counterattacks has gone up mildly, their defending has gone up mildly. And actually the amount of kind of physical tackles they make have also kind of shot up. So, like, in no uncertain terms, basically Mainz have just improved across the board. And I think it's just a huge, compliment to the entire squad and to that entire team that, Bo Henriksen has basically came in, hasn't really changed a huge amount, but I think he's just improved standards across the board that they're now picking up, a huge amount of appreciation already. As you said, Kicker kind of giving them a lot of praise. They're kind of flirting with the idea of finishing in the European spot. And they've got the star man up front in Burkhardt, who, has said he'll only leave Mainz in the summer when a good offer comes in that the club are happy with, because he feels a degree of, loyalty to the club as well, and gratitude for the way they've stuck through him with injuries and things like that. So it's a good time to be a Mainz fan. It's almost like harping back to the old days, Manu, where Mainz were just this really good club at just kind of hammering out these head coaches. It felt like one after the other. They just had this wonderful environment. They're almost like one of those like incubation things, like in Silicon Valley, where they could just kind of have these young people come through and these young entrepreneurs, and they go off and build Microsoft or Apple or something. Mainz are kind of like that. Used to be like that for head coaches in German football. And you could say they've almost kind of continued to do that. I'm trying to remember who the sporting director was back then.
It's the same guy, it's Heidel.
Yeah, I thought that. He came back, didn't he?
He's not this. Yeah, you're right. He did come back, but he's president now.
Yeah, where was he? Where was he in between? Was it Schalke? I was confused. Hamburg and Schalke. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair enough that you confused those two. They're both dumpster fires.
Yeah, they're both blue and shit. So yeah, but yeah, it's good that he's back at Mainz, and it does kind of feel like the good old days of Mainz again. And long may it continue. Having said that, though, they'll come up against a St Pauli team who aren't bad away from home by any means. In fact, the points that they have more or less picked up so far this season have come away from home. They've recently beaten Heidenheim. They've recently beaten Stuttgart. Very narrow defeat to Bochum as well in between there as well. So I think it'll be actually a really tight match. But with Burkhardt back and the way that he kind of really kicked into gear last week, I would be surprised if Mainz pick up all 3 points here and, continue that kind of charge to European football.
I mean, the one thing that really stands out to me too here is of the teams that are in that fourth spot contention at the moment, right? Leipzig, Freiburg, Mainz, obviously, Stuttgart, Gladbach, and I think we should probably count Wolfsburg in there too. They're in that 4-point range within fourth place. I think Bremen and Dortmund are probably too far away now. But of those teams, Mainz are the best with the one with the best goal differential, +11. Followed by Wolfsburg with +9 and Stuttgart +7. Freiburg with -7. And I think that is actually something that's really important to keep in mind here, because sometimes when you have teams really closely clustered together and you're trying to separate them from one another, that goal differential is actually quite a telling metric, right? Because it shows you that consistently they have gotten results going their way in a manner that like shows that they have been the better team, right? I think it also shows that maybe with Freiburg, with their -7, there were some results in there that made it a little lucky. And that's something that maybe is a worrying trend for them too. So that +11 also is an extra point at the end of the day, right? I mean, they have that extra goal in a league this tight can make the difference between finishing 4th or 5th maybe. And I think that's really interesting because, that really shows to me that this Mainz success has been sustainable. It highlights that they are a team that can consistently do this, and although they had their wobbles as well, which isn't that surprising, but I just feel, I get the sense that they have put this on a solid foundation, and I do think that they're probably going to win this game against St Pauli. I mean, like St Pauli, a tough opponent, they're very good defensively. But as we mentioned, they are without one of their key signings for this winter. And yeah, I think this Mainz team is really, really good.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we talked about Karlsruhe. I've talked about Burkhardt. I think another player that's also maybe worth mentioning is Paul Niebel, the central midfielder. Came through Mainz's youth academy, was on loan at Karlsruhe. Whose name I always really struggled to pronounce with my Scottish accent. He did really well in his fight Bundesliga last season. He was there for 2 years actually. In the first season he picked up 10 goals and assists. Second season picked up 14 goals and assists. And so far this season he's got 8 goals and assists in the Bundesliga, which I think is really, really impressive from a central midfield kind of playmaking role. Only 22 years old, so definitely one to keep an eye on. Because that Mainz team is peppered with older players. It's not. I mean, it does have. There are young players, but of course, but it's a lot of kind of somewhat older players as well. I would say, who are kind of your seasoned Bundesliga pros, and that's absolutely fine by no means. But he and Burkhardt are obviously the kind of young stars in that team. It'll be interesting to see what happens to them this season. But I would also maybe just say before we maybe move on is that I think 3 points here against St Pauli are probably something that Henriksen will be desperate to pick up, because if you look at Mainz's fixtures on the horizon, after the St Pauli game, they then go away to Leipzig, they go away to Gladbach, they play at home to Freiburg, then they're away to Borussia Dortmund, and then they've got Kiel and Hoffenheim, and then you then get into the kind of final stretch of the season. So they've kind of, in a way, managed to benefit a lot from playing some of the lesser teams in the Bundesliga. They've obviously played Heidenheim, Augsburg, Werder Bremen, Union Berlin very recently, Bochum before that as well. So they've kind of had the run of teams that are below them in the league, and they deserve a huge amount of credit for the manner in which they picked up more or less maximum points from those games, and that's why they're in the position that they're in now. But I think some really tough tests are to come. So we'll maybe see them kind of, the league kind of course correct with them. I mean, we might see them drop back down to mid-table, but equally we might not. We might see them pick up some big scalps and keep going, but they'll definitely be one to keep an eye on. But in terms of this game, I think this is a really important 3 points for them. And if they do pick up the 3 points, I think that's a good example of how they've just become a very good team at just getting the job done when they come up against these games where they're expected to win.
So currently they're on pace for 54 points, which is would be the most. 2015, 2016, they managed 50 under coach Martin Schmidt. And 54 points was always enough. In the last 9 out of 10 seasons was always enough to at least reach the Europa League. So there's that. They have the second best defense in the league after Bayern Munich. And in Burkhardt, the best German striker in the league. So things are looking pretty good for Mainz. See how long it lasts. Speaking of really good German strikers, that's the next topic right here. Tim Kleindienst. He has been phenomenal as well. It's so easy maybe to break down this success that Gladbach has had. this year, who, in my opinion, are right there as well in that hunt for that fourth place. They're on 34 points, 1 point behind Mainz, Stuttgart, and 2 points behind Freiburg, 3 points behind fourth place Leipzig. That Gladbach team, I mean, it was such an amazing signing that they did with Tim Kleindienst. Who's slowly but surely becoming the number one striker for Germany as well. Julian Nagelsmann lost him because he thinks he can be both a target man, but he's also really good with his feet. He's a great transition player, right? Combines those two things really well, and that's a rarity. We have, of course, Niklas Füllkrug, who was previously that player, but I think Tim Kleindienst is probably a bit better with his feet. 14 goals across all competitions for Tim Kleindienst this year. That is fantastic. It's one of the best strikers in German football, period. I think, so much about the success is about him, but it's also how Gerardo Seoane built a team to have him succeed. We're looking at players like Rocco Reitz, for example, who have done really well, right? Alexander Player is sort of coming back. Frank Hornerat has been playing a big role for them. It just feels like after years in which they had a period where things weren't going so well, Seoane had a tough start in Gladbach too, after being fired at Leverkusen, even though, we need to underline this, we've said this before on this podcast, Leverkusen actually really liked Seoane. They just felt that he wasn't getting through the dressing room anymore, right? That was the issue. They actually liked his approach, they liked his tactics, they liked his playing style. They thought that he had a really good coach. It's just that the chemistry with the squad wasn't there. Some of these issues were also in place in Gladbach, but it seems like he has worked through that, and he seems like that Gladbach have really found something very special here.
Yeah, it does. It feels like they've kind of rounded the corner, to be perfectly honest with you. And you could maybe make an argument that maybe the key thing here is that there are quite a lot of new faces in this squad this season. Tim Kleindienst is the most obvious one. First and foremost, just the sheer amount of goals, but also the amount of assists that he's pulling in every week is a game changer. We're talking about a player who's got 14 goals. He's also got 7 assists, which is huge. He's actually, if I'm not mistaken, the club's top goal scorer and top assist creator, which is just remarkable. So, that kind of classic target man. And the team and the player who, this team has just been completely built around. I was just quickly checking some stats there before we came on air, and one of the things that's really quite interesting is that according to Opta, Gladbach are actually third in the league for counter-attacks, which have led to a shot this season. They're level with Leverkusen, more than Stuttgart, more than Bremen, more than Wolfsburg, more than Dortmund, way more than twice as many as Bayern Munich, and only 3 behind Frankfurt, who would be considered to be like this counter-attacking machine. And interestingly, Leipzig are top, but obviously Leipzig just don't know how to score goals, so they just seem to run up the pitch and then trip over each other. But yeah, I think there's a huge amount of there's just so many fresh faces. You could talk about Tim Kleindienst in the middle of the park. Up front, Kevin Stögers obviously came in from Bochum, who's doing pretty well there. Rocco Reitz, obviously a young player who's kind of going from strength to strength. And can you remember how many seasons used to kind of moan about Florian Neuhaus and whether he was staying, whether he was going, whether the team could be built around him? And he's basically just picked up no game time at all. Obviously, I think that's largely due to the fact that, he maybe wants to leave the club, or the club are trying to figure out what to do with him. But he's just been completely sidelined in this Gladbach team. And it's fine, in terms of they've got a replacement, a bona fide replacement in Rocco Reitz there, really. Lukanets is now another really impressive one at left back as well. And of course, the goalkeeper who's doing tremendously well there as well. Trying to remember, Morris Nicholas as well. Sorry, I had the other guy's name up in front of me. Sorry,
Omlin, right?
Jonas Omlin there. I was trying to make sure which one I got them right there. So, not all these players obviously joined the club this season or starting the season, but if you go back even 3 years ago or 3 seasons ago, this squad has completely changed more or less. There's very few players left in it. I mean, yeah, you have your kind of odd, kind of like, Alassane players and guys like that. But for the most part, and of course, Joe Scally, who seems like he's been there since he's about 14 years old. But for the most part, it is a team that has kind of evolved over the years and specifically over the last kind of 12 or 18 months. I think Gerardo Siona deserves a huge amount of credit. He was given the time to kind of rebuild this squad in his own image. And we're now kind of seeing the benefits of that. I think they're a really, really impressive team who, can, as I mentioned, are fantastic at counter-attacking. One of the best teams in the league at counter-attacking, but they're defending so much better this season. They're holding on to the ball so much more this season. Interestingly enough, their actual goals scored in terms of, obviously goals per game in the Bundesliga have actually dropped this season compared to last season. But I think the really crucial thing is they're not conceding as many goals, and they're probably just controlling matches a lot more than they were last year. That was certainly the case against Union Berlin, where they absolutely thumped them. I know the game finished 2-1, but if you kind of look at the stats and you kind of look at their form and the XG in that game, Gladbach were comfortable winners there. So everything just seems to be going really well for Gladbach, which is also another kind of callback to the Bundesliga 10 years ago. Gladbach and Mainz kind of raced up the league. Feels like me covering German football for the first time. But long may it continue. I like to see Gladbach doing well, and I'm glad to see Gerardo Siona finally getting his, the credit he deserves as a Bundesliga head coach.
You're reminiscing about the Bruchweg boys with Louis Holtby, André Schürrle, and Scholai, at Mainz. I also need to fact check myself here. So I got this slightly wrong. Tim Kleindienst is the best German scorer in the Bundesliga this season with 14 goals in 21 games. But Burkhardt was just behind him with 1 goal less, with 13 goals, is the most effective. He scores every 94 minutes for Mainz this year. Yeah. So just fact checking myself here. I don't want to have anyone complain to me afterwards. Both those numbers are outstanding. You mentioned Kleindienst. He also has 6 assists to his name, 7 if you go across all competitions. So, I think that is a testament to what he's done at Gladbach. And sometimes it's just that final puzzle piece, isn't it? When you just add a player like him, and all of a sudden it all clicks. And I just finished watching the Heidenheim game as you were speaking here. They're now out of the Conference League, which is probably a good thing for them, to be honest with you. Yeah. But it also shows you that you take a player like that out of a team like that, right? And he became national team player. I think he became national team player while he was still playing for Heidenheim. And he now put him into this team. And sometimes it's subtraction and addition that shows you how good a player is, right? Because a lot of these pieces already existed for Gladbach last year. I mean, the other one is Stöger, who also, had a good game last match day. But, sometimes it really is those final additions that you just need to make a team click and make it work. And I just think that Gladbach needed some time to kind of sort themselves out again. The Max Eberl departure, I think, was a big breaking point for them. He was the architect of their previous success. There's no doubt about it, and it was a very noisy departure. I think when he left, Leipzig broke that down in a piece of what actually happened there, right? Which is still on the Substack, if you want to read back on that. Very noisy, very loud, messy divorce from Gladbach. And I think the team, the entire club, the entire city just needed to collect themselves a little bit and reinvent themselves too, because for so many years leading into COVID, this was a club that would develop players and sell them on for a lot of money to the Premier League, right? That was the business model. And just that doesn't work anymore. We have outlined this many times in the podcast that doesn't work anymore. And so they have kind of departed that model. And, Kleindienst, again, is a great example for that. Here comes a striker in his prime, 29 years old, emerges onto German football a little later than most, right, at 29. I think we've spoken about this in the past. I think it's you have this really weird phenomena in Germany that you see a lot of strikers in their mid to late 20s all of a sudden becoming key players for their clubs because for so many years, Germany decided that they didn't need strikers anymore. And so, players like Kleindienst were sort of banned to the second and third division, and head coaches and opted to not play strikerless formations. So, these were almost like this ostracized breed that is now making like this big comeback. So that's why you had all of a sudden these like 28, 29-year-olds making these massive impacts at clubs. But, I think it just shows a bit of a changing time in Gladbach in general. This is a club that's back on the up, and it's great too because they're such an important institution in German football in general.
Yeah, it is, and I think I think one thing is really worth. I mean, we've kind of said this, but just to hammer home again, just like how it really is impressive the fact that basically two of their best attacking players are players that they signed this season. If you were to say to Gladbach fans, like, you'd pick up Tim Kleindienst and Kevin Stoger for €7 million combined. Obviously, Stoger was a free transfer. Kleindienst was just €7 million, which is just absolute bonkers. Yeah. And between them, they've got, 21, 26 goals and assists already in the Bundesliga. It's just mad. I was quickly checking there as well. In terms of key passes, which is a stat I love to use, which is a pass that leads to a shot. Kevin Stoger is second only to Joshua Kimmich in the Bundesliga. So he's basically the second best playmaker in the league. Frank Honorat as well hasn't played a huge amount of football because of injuries and stuff, but he's only 4 key passes behind Jamal Musiala, even though Musiala's played like 5 extra games on him this season. So they're both doing really well. But then, they've just kind of got this extra depth, or maybe it's not just extra depth, but just extra belief. Like, for example, Robin Hack comes in, tremendous run to set up the opening goal against Union Berlin last weekend. I mentioned Alassane Blea, who was maybe like a kind of key player 2 or 3 seasons ago, but he's now playing this kind of supporting role. He's already got 11 goals and assists so far this season as well. So, there's a degree of depth in that team. And maybe it's like hidden depth because everyone just kind of thinks it's a one-man team with Tim Kleindienst sitting in the box all day, and people just lump it up to him and he just kind of knocks heads at home, and then that's all Gladbach do. But no, they do have good players across the pitch. And like I said, they're doing all this with Florian Neuhaus sitting on the bench every week. So it's a good squad, and it'll be really interesting to see how far they can go. And of course, if they can go on and beat Augsburg at the weekend. But it is worth pointing out, and this is kind of what I meant to say earlier on, is that the big news this week was obviously the fact that goalkeeper Maurice Nicolas has picked up an injury until the end of the season, and it looks like Jonas Oblem, who they signed from Montpellier for €9 million in 2023, he'll be stepping in there. So it'll be interesting to see if that has a huge impact on Gladbach's form, going forward, because they are picking up results, but like I said, like they aren't actually scoring more goals than they were last season. The games are tighter, but they're just grinding out more results. 2-1 against Union Berlin, 1-1 against Frankfurt, 2-1 against Stuttgart. So they are fine margins, and the difference between a really good goalkeeper and an average goalkeeper can sometimes be the difference between picking up 3 points, picking up 1 point, or suddenly losing games. So we'll need to see how they do. But they've got Augsburg next and Heidenheim, so they might be in some luck for a little bit longer.
Heidenheim finally gets a breathe. On the goalkeeper situation, before we move on to the Topspiel, or our Topspiel, it's not the Topspiel, Bundesliga scheduled is for Sunday. The Omlin situation is actually quite interesting, because he was the keeper that Gladbach brought in to replace Jan Sommer when Jan Sommer was transferred to Bayern Munich. For that second half of the season, Jan Sommer then got to pick up a Meisterschale before he moved on to Italy. thanks to Borussia Dortmund, Borussia Dortmund's epic collapse. But, Omlin is a good goalkeeper. He just has been so unlucky since he's joined Gladbach. And we need to also add, he's technically the club's captain. So, this isn't like, oh no, here comes the number 2. I mean, the full intent here was that Omlin would be Jan Sommer's replacement in the long term and really take over, right? But I'm just going to go through the injuries here since they signed him. He arrives right away, misses 2 games, gets fit, misses another 2 games, then has a shoulder injury, misses another 25 games. Then he struggles with fitness, misses another 8 games. Then sees out last season with another missed 2 games. This season starts the year with missing 5 games from September to October, right? And then struggles with fitness issues into November, misses another 3 games. So there's a lot of games he's missed just with injuries, and the poor guy just hasn't been able to get fit. So obviously, other keepers have stepped up. Nichols has been fantastic for them. He's a good goalkeeper. At the end of the day, he was signed to do what he is now going to get to do. Be the number one, be the leader of this team. You don't make someone captain and then put him on the bench. I personally think that if we see the omelet that we saw at Montpellier and the goalkeeper that they signed for 9 million euros, Gladbach will be just fine.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. It's a really, really good point that, he is there and ready to kind of step in and kind of be the main man again. And this is the perfect opportunity. He's basically now got half a season to prove himself. And it's a great problem for Gladbach to have. It's a great problem for Siona to have.
They have good depth in goal, really good depth.
Yeah, but like we said, they've kind of got good depth across the pitch now, which is maybe something. I mean, I think Gladbach of yesteryear were a team that relied on like 2 or 3 star players every year, and those players tended to get sold this summer, so they'd have to do it all over again. Whereas now, yeah, they still do have great young players who, they could probably sell for a lot of money, but for the most part, like Kevin Stoger's not going to go anywhere. Kleindienst probably isn't going to go anywhere. Because they're both a bit older. Obviously, Stoger's older than Kleindienst, but it's not like having like Marco Reus in the team or Marcus Thuram or something like that. It's a different Gladbach side. It's a more settled, humble side, and they seem quite happy just to get their head down and keep on picking up points.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's move on to the big game. Bayern host Eintracht Frankfurt on Sunday at the Allianz Arena. Good news for Bayern fans. They've only lost to Eintracht Frankfurt 4 times at home. We don't talk about the other way around because that's not pretty news for Bayern Munich either. I've been twice to Eintracht Frankfurt against Bayern Munich at the Waldstadion, and both times it's been 5 goals for Frankfurt. So, we don't talk about the reverse, but this is a game that Bayern Munich should be, historically at least, has done well. A really big question mark over Harry Kane's fitness. We all saw him limp through the mix zone after the game. The dramatic 1-1 draw against Celtic. He had to come off at halftime. This has been such a big discussion point. You wrote about it, not this week, last week. We talked about it on several podcasts. His fitness, his health, his overall fitness that I've alluded to in the Substack chat, I have questioned. I don't think he looks like the model athlete of last season. And that could be the injuries, it could be lifestyle, it could be just age. It's all catching up to all of us eventually. I think that's a huge question mark. And I do wonder how Bayern Munich are going to replace him if he can't play. And if he does play, whether that's actually even a good thing. Because we've all known that whenever Harry Kane has an ankle injury, and I actually suspect he's probably been struggling with that ankle for most of this year. Again, his goal record is excellent with 21 goals. The moment you take away those penalties, he's behind Tim Kleindienst and Burkhardt, right? I think that's a really, really important thing to point out here. It's the penalties that really pave over some massive cracks in his game this season. And with all that in mind, this is really the big question, is that if Kane does get fit or fit enough to play, is it even beneficial for Bayern Munich to play him in this match? Or is it just even the best that you just say, look, we don't have a Champions League game midweek, there's no German Cup midweek. Even if we lose this game, we have such a nice cushion now to Eintracht Frankfurt. Maybe it's time to rest the guy a little bit.
Yeah, I was actually going to approach it from another way by saying, Kane dropping out of a game like this would be a benefit to Bayern Munich in theory, because, we've talked a lot on this show about the way that he struggled in games, and hey, that Leverkusen match last weekend, just most recent example. He spent most of that game playing, walking around the centre circle, and I don't mean walking around the centre circle because his team are pinned back. I mean, he was literally behind, like, the front line, rubbing shoulders with Joshua Kimmich, like trying to make passes, because he just simply couldn't get up and down the pitch fast enough. And obviously he was quite isolated, as he usually is in these games. And he was a passenger, and it's something that we've talked a lot about for much of this season, and in the sense that Bayern can't press teams when he's in the team because he doesn't press, or he can't run. He can run, but he can't chase players down, like a more traditional kind of pressing forward, if you will. So in theory, him dropping out of a game like this would be good. The problem is that Bayern don't have anyone to replace him.
Yeah.
They let Matthias Tell leave for Tottenham in January. There's maybe Thomas Müller, who I think, if I'm not mistaken, came on for a couple of minutes at the end of the Leverkusen game.
And against Celtic too.
Sorry, Celtic, my apologies. It's the Celtic game I was thinking of, because Mr. Rent-A-Quote, Lothar Matthäus, blew his casket over it. Apparently it was a huge amount. It was a huge disrespect to a German icon that is Thomas Müller, that he came on for 2 or 3 minutes before full time, according to Lothar Matthäus. But, his wish might be granted. Müller may have to start this game from the get-go, or we'll see something different. I think, if I'm not mistaken, from what my memory serves me right, I think Kompany replaced Kane in the Celtic game with Kompany, and then
Coman. No, wait.
Coman. God almighty. He replaced it with Kingsley Coman, but then Coman ended up moving out left, and then they played this kind of hybrid system, so if it's not Thomas Müller, I'm guessing it'll probably be Serge Gnabry up front. I was just quickly checking which players have the best XG per 90 stats in the Bayern team, and interestingly enough, after Harry Kane, it is Serge Gnabry who actually has the highest, XG per 90 in the league in terms of actual But then that's also maybe kind of dictated by the fewer minutes he's played. If you just go based on who's racked up the most non-penalty XG this season, it's Harry Kane, Jamal Musiala, and then Leroy Sané, and then Serge Gnabry comes in fourth place there. So we know Serge Gnabry can kind of play that kind of striker formation or position if he has to. I've never really been entirely convinced by him in that position. You could maybe stick Musiala in there, but equally I think he's like a second striker. I think he has to play off somebody to get the best out of him. He has to kind of play 1-2s in the middle of the pitch with someone. I don't think we can really expect Musiala to sit, with his back to goal for the entire game, for example. So it's a genuine problem for Bayern, because I just don't think they really have anyone there unless it is Thomas Müller. But then I don't think Müller could probably do a full 90 minutes anymore. So, we're talking about a player here who is, a lot of reports are openly discussing the idea that he might retire in 3 or 4 months. So it's a big problem for Bayern, and it's one of their own making, because they never had a proper replacement for Kane on the pitch, or in the team, and the only possible player who could maybe step in is currently on loan at Tottenham.
Yeah, and Vidovic came back from Mainz, right? I don't think he is an option here. The double Foals 9 is an interesting one. I think that's how they dissolved the second half against Celtic, and they did get their goal in the form of Alphonso Davies stumbling it across the line.
They could stick Goretzka up front.
That's not the worst idea in the world. He's really good with his head. But you can't always rely on. I love both Schmeichels as goalkeeper. Peter Schmeichel was one of my idols growing up, and Kasper Schmeichel, I think, is an excellent goalkeeper as well. But they're kind of like mini Oliver Kahns, right? And in some ways, as spectacular as they make saves look like, oftentimes they then get the basic ones wrong. And that was a really good example, right? Because it was a terrible, terrible fumble that led to that. Yes, it's close distance and all that, but no one has ever really talked about the fact that Kasper should have probably had that and should have never allowed get into a situation where Davies can stumble across the line. And I'm not sure if Kevin Trapp is going to give them that sort of benefit in this match. Mind you, now that I said it, Kevin Trapp mistake incoming. It's the good old jinx, right? But I do think that is an aspect here that we have to think about, like where the goal's going to come from. And I'm not sure when I look at this backline that Frankfurt have assembled, right, with Christensen, Tuta, and Teate, who all have been excellent. Whether like just swinging balls into the box and hoping for the best is going to work here, especially when you don't. I guess Goretzka would be your target man if he does end up playing. And he is projected to play. Again, we're recording this on a Thursday. A lot of things can happen till Sunday, so please take this with a grain of salt. I do wonder what the strategy here is going to be. And, Frankfurt is rested. They didn't have to play midweek, right? This is another thing that we really have to keep in mind. Frankfurt is still in the Europa League, but they finished in the top 8, so they got the benefit of sitting a match out. We all have seen. And this is also something that I just found really surprising. I said this after the Celtic game and after the Leverkusen game already. I don't understand why this Bayern Munich team looks so tired, right? They just look exhausted. And if they look as exhausted as they did against Celtic and against Leverkusen, I think this Frankfurt team could really hurt them. And I wrote a big article about Can Uzun and how excellent he has been for Frankfurt. I actually think he is going to start from the bench in this game because his biggest ability isn't necessarily speed. And if you play him, you can't play Mario Götze. Mario Götze has been fantastic this year. Speaking of intelligent passes, he's one of the best at it. He is in that number 8 role that he's really manifested himself and reinvented himself as a player. He's really taking control there, but if you have him in a lineup, you need other fast players if you want to have success in Munich, right? You need to be able to overwhelm this Bayern Munich defense with speed, and that's why I personally, Ekitike is a given, but I actually wonder if we're going to see Wahi starting in this game because of the speed that he can bring, and whether he's going to come on and try to overwhelm this Bayern Munich defense that has been a lot better, best defense in the Bundesliga, but is still at times offers these glimpses of chaos.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see if Frankfurt do approach this game, as you said, because on the one hand, it's Bayern Munich at home at the Allianz Arena, and they should be looking to win this game on paper against that Frankfurt team, by the way, who've only won one of the last 7 games away from home in all competitions. There's a few games in there, like, for example, the Roma game in the Europa League, which didn't really mean anything, so you could kind of discount that match if you want. But even still, it's not great by any means. But they're coming up against a Bayern team who, as you said, are tired. Will be even more tired after that Celtic game where Celtic ran them ragged, and very, very, very could have very easily went to extra time, and they're out without their star striker and Harry Kane, and I think it'd be really interesting to see if Frankfurt can kind of implement a similar system to actually what Celtic did, and to an extent what Leverkusen did as well, where it feels to me like this Bayern team you can really get at them if you can really pile the pressure on both fullbacks. And when it comes to Frankfurt, they obviously have a number of wide players who can do exactly that. Hugo Ekitike is a player who's obviously a striker, but he can drift out wide. You've obviously got Nathaniel Brown in there as well, who's having a really, really good season. And Angzar Nauf as well as the other one. So I was actually looking at which players in this Frankfurt team have the highest non-penalty expected goals and expected assists. So more or less which players are creating the most goal-scoring opportunities in open play. And interestingly enough, Hugo Ekitike has now overtaken Marmoush's record before he left for Frankfurt. So before he left Frankfurt for Manchester City, Hugo Ekitike is now 1.01. Marmoush was on 0.94. Chan Ozon is on 0.74, so he's obviously doing really well. Now, that has to be taken with a pinch of salt because he's only played 400 minutes, so, obviously a much lower, data set there. So take that with a pinch of salt. But if you kind of want to use the players who have been more or less playing full-time, second and third place are actually Nathaniel Brown and Angzar Nalf there. And, I think that's really, really interesting. And below that, it's Rasmus Christensen, who's obviously can play that kind of right side, and Hugo Larsson, who's the kind of box-to-box midfielder who loves to make late runs into the box. And that's really encouraging for Frankfurt because these are all very fast, very physical players who would love to get in Bayern's face, and players who are so important to Frankfurt to support Hugo Ekitike. We talked about this a few weeks ago when we talked about Frankfurt and the need for them to be more than just a one-man team. And that's basically what we got against Holstein Kiel. Brown sets up Larsson for the first goal, Tusa scores the second, and then after Ekitike misses a penalty, Chan Ozon then scores in the second half. Now, that was against Holstein Kiel at home in front of, 6,000 to 8,000 ravenous Frankfurt fans. To do it at the Allianz Arena, where Bayern are there for the taking, I think is another thing entirely. And it'll be really interesting to see how Frankfurt mentally and, can approach this game. Because there's a lot of young players there. There's a lot of young players in that team who are just kind of waiting to kind of burst onto the scene. Some would argue already have. But it feels like they have the tools there to actually really hurt this Bayern team the way the Celtic did and the way the Leverkusen did. And it'd be interesting to see if Dino Topmüller, who we know is a fantastic tactician, will kind of look at that Celtic or that Bayern team and say to, Axel Nalf or Brown or Christensen or whoever, he's like, right, I want you guys on top of Konrad Laimer and Rafa Guerrero. Maybe Davies starts, so it's a wee bit different, but I want you on those fullbacks. I want you harassing the space between Upamecano, Kim, and those fullbacks day and night. And this just makes things really uncomfortable for Bayern Munich for 90 minutes. I still think this is a game that Bayern technically should be winning because of Frankfurt's away record, but I think there is the possibility for an upset, especially, as you said, when you consider just kind of the way that Bayern have been looking recently.
Well, again, Frankfurt have only won 4 games in their entire history in Munich. So this goes beyond the Allianz Arena. It's a big ask, but, this is, I think this is an Eintracht Frankfurt team that maybe in 2 or 3 years, where if they continue building, we can see them maybe challenge for a Bundesliga title, right? I do think this is how well they have worked in that city and with that club. The tools are slowly but surely being arranged in the right way for the big job. They're not quite there yet. I think they're going to finish top 4 this season, which is going to be a big step for them. But I don't think they're quite there yet. And part of the learning process is to go to a place like the Allianz Arena and do well there. Right? There's been too many years where they have beaten Bayern Munich 5-1 at home, but then also got smashed in Munich, right? And so I think, maybe this is a bit of a character test even, where you can see where this team is at. There's interesting quotes from Mario Götze in Kicker this week about how he wants to be there and lead the team and give them the experience. This is the sort of players that you need in these kind of environments. Frankfurt have shown on the biggest stage in recent years that they can be successful. I mean, these Europa League nights come to mind, right? In Barcelona, where they won. They're winning the title against a very good Rangers side, for example. The club has proven that they can be good at the big stage, and I think maybe this is the next step. And we'll see if they can finally take it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it'll be really interesting to see how that midfield battle plays out because obviously, Bezuides, Larsson, and Götze, and whoever else is in there, will probably scary, I'd imagine. If they can kind of take a look at that Goretzka Kimmich double pivot, they will probably have maybe Pavlovic will come back into the team. Pavlovic, I keep calling Pavlovic. He's not a dessert.
Or Duchess.
So that's an interesting kind of part of the pitch that's worth keeping an eye on as well, because again, I just feel like Celtic and Leverkusen have just kind of shown that you can make this Bayern team bleed. And
Yep.
I know we talked about how Leverkusen didn't get the job done and they should have done better, and tactically Alonso maybe kind of lost that wee bit in the second half, but I think Celtic took that one step further. Again, didn't win the game, so it seems like a silly comparison to make, but I think Frankfurt should be looking after those two games and thinking, yeah, we can do that. We can cause further upset. And I hope that's what we see. I hope Frankfurt don't just show up and they play and they play to the what's the word I'm looking for? They don't play to the situation or, the scenario as opposed to the team in front of them.
Yeah.
It's not what's the word I'm looking for there? The occasion, that's what I'm looking for. They don't play to the occasion, is what I mean. And they play the team in front of them. They don't turn into like rabbits in the headlights and start worrying about playing at the Allianz Arena. They show up and say, no, actually, we can actually match this team man for man, and we can take something from this game.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating to watch. I'm looking forward to tune in. Sunday morning in the US, after the afternoon, evening in Europe. Enjoy it. I think this is going to be a really good game between two really good teams. So should be a fascinating matchup. We'll be back next week, as I mentioned already. We're going to recap the DFB Pokal matches, and of course we're going to recap this match day. And then the usual slate of Substacks and news articles, etc. are going to be available for you. Also need to mention, of course, this show is brought to you by Bet Online. And then also, if you're only interested in bonus podcasts, we do 2 bonus podcasts every week. You can find those on the YouTube channel as well, and subscribe to them on YouTube. $2.99, right, Stefan? Is the $2.99 US, I should add. Is the price. It's half the price of the Substack. You don't get the articles. You only get the extra podcasts. If you only want to listen to extra podcasts, you can find those there. All right. That shall be it for us this week. Enjoy the match day. And until next week, auf Wiedersehen.